it over to Kerry, who is going to look at one sector that has been still active, and that's our grocery store sector. So Kerry, are you ready to join us here?
Yep, absolutely.
Great. So we're going to actually start off your section with another poll. And so I know that some people were not able to see some of the results, so I'll make sure that we share results with the poll after. So let me pull up our poll here, and I'm going to launch it. All right. So in the past week, how often have you gone to the grocery store? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or more times. So I'm going to wait for those results to come in. Kerry, how often have you gone to the grocery store?
I'm actually one of those people that went twice because my first trip, I actually was foolish enough to try to go out looking for flour, which I don't know about everybody else, but in Southern California, I think everybody's staying home baking because there is no flour to be found anywhere. And I was actually looking at it to do some breading. So then wound up going out later in the week after a couple of days and didn't find any there. So I instead found some ramen noodles, which was another short supply thing. So I was very excited about that. So yeah, I'm one of those people that went out twice this week.
Twice, all right.
Yeah.
I went out once myself, and it looks like the majority of our poll goers, or our poll takers, are have gone once. So I'm going to end this poll, and I am going to share our results here. Great. So it looks like you guys can see the results now. The majority of you have gone to the grocery store once. I have gone once this week too. And a pro tip out there, those Asian supermarkets, if you're near one, they are so fully stocked with things. So Kerry, if I knew you needed flour, I would have got you some.
Yeah,
at the market.
I live within a few miles of quite a number of Asian markets, so maybe I'll be going out for a third time this week. Doesn't come after me, or Mayor Rossetti.
All right, well, let's see how the rest of the nation looks like with their shopping behavior. So I'm gonna toss this over. I'm going to stop sharing our poll results, and I'm going to toss this over to you, Kerry.
Cool. All right. So what we decided to do was take a look at national grocery store foot traffic. And you can see in this chart, here's our trend. For this analysis, we decided to use March 15th as a good sort of coverall date nationwide for when we started getting the shelter-in-place orders. And of course, the way that that's run out nationwide has been, different from state to state, and certainly some states didn't do any official shelter at home, but it was a good time for when it got into the national consciousness, and even people in states that didn't have shelter at home orders were hearing about others that did. So before the pandemic and before 3/15, you can kind of see this traffic that I think anybody working in grocery stores or retail will tell you, that most shoppers were attending on Saturday and Sunday. And a good amount of people were seen in grocery stores in terms of an overall percentage of observed devices. But then after the state of emergency started happening, you can see that the foot traffic really started dropping off, especially in that really steep decline in the week afterward. And since that time, from 3/22 sort of onward, you still kind of see a little bit of the seesawing and kind of leveling off at a new lower area. And still, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday seem to be the primary, the busiest shopping days across the board. And one interesting thing, though, has been the change in shopping days and times. This is looking again at pre and post COVID, the shopping days, where beforehand you saw the majority of traffic really Saturday being the darkest blue there is really kind of popping out as getting the majority of visits. But this is now kind of spreading out post-COVID. You can see that all of the bars are now lower in size or more even in size. And the activity is sort of spread more out on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And even bleeding into Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, leads you to think that, well, obviously a lot more people are not going out of their homes to work during the daytimes and or are out of work. And so not concentrating so much on doing these kind of essential errands on the weekends. And then in terms of the time of day, we see a similar kind of thing. Pre-COVID-19, very much saw people coming at the, as school is letting out, as work is letting out, that the primary hours of shopping were in that late evening. Now we can see during the COVID time, much more spread out during the afternoon, where you have people coming between noon and 5, and just anecdotally myself, having been out a few times, it absolutely is, the hours of being busy have definitely spread out. The grocery store was pretty crowded at about 1 o'clock the other day when I went out. So you can really see how this change in shopping behavior, it's totally popping out of the mobile location data. The next thing that we did was we went ahead and decided to look at a regional grocery chain to try to see if whether or not some of the shelter in place, or if any one particular regional chain was different than what patterns we're seeing nationally. So we used a grocery chain. It's got about 100 stores located in the Midwest. And we can see some interesting patterns pop out for this chain compared to other ones. For instance, yes, their overall store traffic is down, but there's an interesting side effect in terms of the number of new customers that they're getting. And so it's kind of a good news, bad news in that, they have less devices overall, but they are attracting a new customer. And so as we're starting to see, maybe, hopefully, knock on some sort of wood, a light at the end of the tunnel where the economy maybe can start moving back to a little bit more normal, here's an opportunity for this grocery chain to try to turn these new customers, which are exactly like, what I just went through, right? Where I decided to go to another store that wasn't my usual grocery store in hopes that I would find flour there. We're probably seeing the same thing with this grocery store chain. And so how this grocery store can use this analysis is to say, oh, wow, we have these new customers. Maybe we can start advertising to them and turn them into regular customers as we start moving forward out of this pandemic. Some other interesting behavior changes for the regional grocery store. They're seeing most of their traffic still on Fridays and Saturdays. They're not seeing as much of a bump or a span out across multiple days, and that's on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you can see here that the regional grocery store actually has, though, that sort of spreading out of pattern of timing where it's much more concentrated during just those afternoon hours and not as much shopping in the early mornings or the evenings. And then finally, some idea of how far people are traveling, and I can see a question popped up about this in our Q&A chat. So the mobile trade area is generated now. For some of you that have looked at trade or draw areas before, you might look at this shape and kind of be like, what is that? Oh, and actually somebody just asked this question, funny. So why is the shape of this trade area so strange? So our trade areas are not generated by 1, 3, or 5 mile rings or have limitations like that. Our trade areas are done by combining the home and work locations of the devices visiting the store. So this is based on actual store visitation. And this is one of those grocery stores chains north of Davenport, Iowa, actually. And so what we do is we basically take all the mobile points from people's travel to and from the grocery store and also from the home and work locations. And we algorithmically draw a shape around that, which can lead to some odd looking shapes, but it can be insightful to say, for instance, like this one, you can see that this grocery store location is pulling people across the river from Moline, which could be people who are going to the grocery store after work, or maybe going to the grocery store on their way to work or things like that. So it can really kind of help a business understand really where people are coming from. So this was our trade area beforehand. If we take a look at it after COVID-19, you can really start to see that the whole entire draw area is starting to shrink, meaning that people are not traveling as far as they used to. And this could also be a side effect of people who are working in this area and maybe were living to the south are no longer doing that daily commute and going to those locations. So you can see that that draw area is really condensing. And on the next slide there, we can also see this when we sort of take and generate a heat map of customer origin points. Before pre-COVID, about 10% of devices lived within a couple of miles of the store, and that you saw a good percentage of the devices, 20% of them were actually out at 25 plus miles. So they were drawing from pretty far. But now after, if we take a look at where we layer in the red origin points now in terms of the after and use that as a heat map, you can see that now almost 20% of the visitors live between 0 and 2 miles away. So we're really seeing people travel a whole lot less. That kind of figures out in one zip code. In fact, this 52722 zip code actually saw a 7% jump in terms of visitation from that particular zip code. So again, from a recovery perspective, really speaking to that, that local aspect now and new customers where they weren't seeing that before. And so as we look forward to recovery planning, you know, mobile data can do a lot of different things for you. Some of the stuff that we showed you today is comparing the foot traffic of your brand to a national sector or to other local competitors. You can really get an understanding about how your trade area has changed or your customer base has changed, because this is unprecedented times. We are seeing in changes of things like this. And then also to use this information about how you're doing with your customers, where you might be gaining or losing customers, how your customer visitation patterns have changed, and how that can then turn around and inform some sort of marketing effort, you know, again, as we're sort of heading the light out of the tunnel. I saw a couple questions come up in the chat. One was, how can you determine an individual's quote unquote work or home location from the data? We sort of step back a little bit from calling things home and work. We refer to them as common evening and common daytime locations because that's really what they are. We look back at a pattern of device usage over the previous 3 months period of time, weighted toward the most recent month, and determine the most frequent resting place for that device. Generally, this will be about 90% of people will be on an actual home for a common evening location. But it's not guaranteed to be a home. And so we're not trying to do, in our spirit of privacy, we're not trying to match a particular device to an address or a person or a household or anything like that. It's literally just looking at, this is the place where that device spends the most of his time on the evenings or weekends or during the daytime. So I hope that answers that question. And that's all I had, Evelina, if we want to.
Yeah.
Questions came up that I missed.
Yeah, there's another question here. One asked, what percent, for the total visits that you see at a location, what percent of outliers do you suggest taking out?
Oh, generally, as a best practice, we recommend 70% of retained, so 30% of outliers fall away. But our system is actually flexible enough that you can choose to do that. And so we have a number of our clients who run at a 60% retained rate, 65, 80, anywhere in between. Our data and our platform, Vista platform, supports you making that determination on what's right for your business. We're the experts in location data, not in anybody's business. And so we try to be as flexible as possible in determining things like that.
Great. So if anybody else, as you're kind of processing what Kerry has shown in regards to mobile trade areas, common evening location points, looking at origin points, time of day, and day of the week studies. If you have any further questions, be sure to chime in the Q&A section, and I'll be sure to bring Kerry back up to answer those questions. Thanks, Kerry.